Okay, hi everyone. So, things are starting to get interesting with our Vanitas. By now, you should probably have your skull here, your books, and your vase. I've still got one of my vases still unhidden there. What we're going to look at now is the flowers. So, I hope also that your file is starting to look nice and organized. If you look at my outliner here, I've got all of these collections that are labeled, so it's very easy when I want to start to hide things. So our animated element that we haven't done yet, I'll hide that. I'll hide my books, my bones, I'll hide the vase, and I'll also hide the environment table and box. And I'll hide my camera just so I don't have that in the way. Let's have a look at these flowers. Now, as I mentioned a few times already in class and in these tutorials, I really want you to take some creative initiative in this course. And when it comes to objects in your Vanitas, really have a think about, what kind of story or what sort of emotions you can express with your objects. And even when it comes to something like flowers, if you put blend a flower into YouTube, you're just going to get so many really interesting and beautiful approaches to making different types of flowers. You can even learn to animate the flowers. You can have the flowers be healthy or have them be kind of dying. It's really, there's so much you can do here. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you a technique that I learned from this video here about modeling these hibiscus. I actually just changed it a tiny bit so that it looks like these, which are my favorite flower, lilies, and oriental hybrid lilies here, which I also really like. So I want to make something sort of like this, and I'll show you how to do that using pretty much the same technique as this hibiscus video, which is this one here. Okay, so let's just hop into Blender. So this is going to be another tutorial about procedural animation. Procedural modeling. So how to 3D model things using some inbuilt mathematics in Blender rather than having to model all of these petals ourselves. Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to put my 3D cursor back to world origin, and I'm going to Shift A, add a plane. Okay, I'll just click here. At the moment, I'm in an orthographic view, which looks a bit weird. I'm just going to click here onto my 3D gizmo and set it back to perspective. A bit easier to look at. So first of all, I'll leave my plane about this size, and I'm going to just quickly model a very, very basic petal. So using the extrude tool, E, and then S for scale. Well, I've got my proportional editing switched on, so I'll turn that off here, and then S for scale, G for grab, E, S, S. Okay, and I'll maybe scale this, just scale this one up, maybe move it G for grab, a bit further back, E for extrude, S, E for extrude, S. That's looking okay. Maybe I'll make this one a little bit smaller. Okay, that's a good enough place to start. Will my keycaster work? Okay, all right. So now I'm going to just press T and N to bring my tools and my object data back, and I'll make some loop cuts. Excuse me. Okay, so I'll cut down the middle and each side. All right, now let's just do a little bit of modeling. So I'm just going to drag select in edge mode. I'm going to get those edges, and I'm going to turn my proportional editing back on, and I'll press G and Z. And remember, if you use the scroll wheel of your mouse, it will make the influence area of the procedural, proportional editing, change its size, and therefore change the effect of how we model these components. So I'm just going to grab the end and bring it down and rotate it on the Y a little bit, RY, and I'll do the same thing with the front. I'll GZ, RY, something like that. I'll grab, I might just make another couple of loop cuts here to give me a little bit more geometry. Then I'll just grab this row here, GZ, and play with my fall off a little bit. And I might just grab some of this and rotate it. Yeah, that's looking better. And I'll just RY something like that. And right at the end, I'm just going to grab the middle sort of edge loop, and I'll GZ, turn that fall off down, and I'll just sort of fold it in a little bit. Will I do that? Let me just turn my fall off. Oops. I'm just going to do that a little bit differently. GZ, and I want to just have it a little bit more, curved. I had it more like that before, which I didn't like. I sort of want it so the edges look like they're popping up. So that'll do. Okay, so that's already a basic petal shape, and we haven't changed the scale or anything yet. It's just at the original size of that plane, which, if you see my flowers down there, they look tiny, but we're going to fix that in a moment. So first of all, let's get into some procedural modeling. So we're going to add a subdivision modifier, leave it on Catmull-Clark, which rounds things off a bit. If I put it to simple, if I apply this, I'll show you what it does actually. If I go apply, and now I press tab, you can see that it's made a lot more geometry. I'll Control Z to undo that apply. So one thing to note, I'm going to turn this up to 3 and now apply it, and you can see it's made a lot of geometry. So I'll undo that. Now, if you let these numbers get too big, you're going to subdivide to something huge. So I'll apply this so you can see it's really going to start to get big very quickly. And that, I'll just undo that. That can be a problem. You know, if you subdivide something, these numbers don't look like they're going up much. But if you think of cutting something in half, then in half again, then in half again, you have a geometric series where these numbers get very big very quickly. So you really want to be careful with, you don't want these numbers, usually anything above 4 or 5, depending on your computer, you're starting to make a lot of geometry and it can actually crash your computer. So with that in mind, let's just save as. I'm just going to call this, I'm just making another version here. You don't need to make another version, just save your file. I just made another version because I've sort of finished this exercise and I'm just going back into it. So I've got a few versions, but you can just keep it in one version. Okay, so look, here's our basic flower petal. Now let's start by doing some more procedural modeling. We subdivided it so that we've got some extra geometry for this procedural modeling to work on. And I'll show you what I mean. If I put in a displacement modifier here, our petal has moved up a little bit, but nothing's really happened. Click New, and then it'll just make a texture here with a sort of automatic name. And if you click here, this will take us into the settings. And here we could put in all sorts of things. You can actually use an image here, and you could have, a picture of something, push the geometry around. But we're just going to use some procedural geometry, or procedural, image here, which is basically like a form of noise. In this case, it's black and white pixels with gray in the middle, and it's interpolating so there's a smoothness. If we go to pure noise, like this, that's just, black and white, which is not what we want. You could be making something different where that's exactly what you need, but not for us. Clouds is a bit smoother. And we're just going to adjust the scale here until it's a bit bigger. And you can see that we can start to get this sort of automatic kind of lumpiness in the texture, which is a little bit like that sort of soft folding that you see on a flower petal. So something like that I think looks pretty good. So I'll go back into our modifier, and we can also change the strength here, so we can still turn that up and down. And if I turn it up, you can see that this is also how people make things like mountains and so on. Mountains usually use some form of procedural noise, displacing on the z-axis to make those kind of random peaks and valleys that we associate with the natural world. So procedural modeling has a lot of applications. I'll just put that strength back down to 1. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to make some extra little ripples along the edge of the petal. So I'm going to add a second displacement modifier. Now, I'll just make another texture, go in, I'll use clouds again, but this time I'll make the clouds a lot smaller. And we'll get this ripply effect, but we don't want that rippling on the whole flower. We just want it on part of the petal. So what we can do, if we turn these off, this is the great thing about modifiers. They're temporary, what's known as non-destructive editing. So we can turn our modifiers off, and I'm going to go into vertex select mode, and I just want to select all of the vertexes around the edge. I'm going to turn off my procedural proportional editing, we don't need that. And I'm just going to select all these edge vertexes. I could do this a little bit faster by selecting the edge loops around the side, but I'm just showing you so you know I'm selecting vertexes. And what we're going to do is create a vertex group. If we go down to this little triangle here, we're going to click the plus here on vertex groups. I'm going to name it petal edge, and I have to click assign. So if I click off my petal and I click select, if it selects the correct vertexes, then we know that that worked. Okay, so back into the modifiers, I'll turn these back, I'll get out of edit mode and I'll turn these back on. Now for this second one, instead of displacing the whole model, we're just going to get the vertex group, petal edge. And you can see what that's doing. It's pretty cool. If I turn this down, we're just really warping the vertexes around the edge of the flower. And so we can start to get that nice little ripple that you have on the outside of a lily petal. Maybe I'll turn that down a little bit more to 0.5, but that's already looking pretty nice. The next thing we can do is we can add a texture. So the cool thing about all of this is that we only have to make this petal one time. And we can actually use this system to make different petals, all just using the same original one. And I'll show you how we do that. So first of all, let's go back to our UV editing and let's unwrap the petal. So if I go to our petal here, first of all, we need to find an image. And what I had, which I think is kind of nice, is I found this petal online. Now, you can look online. You can also photograph a flower petal. You know, if you have some nice flat lighting, like a cloudy day outside, it's good. Or you can even make something on Photoshop. Like, you know, if you look at some of these, really the texture is just, in this case, it's a bit of green in the middle, and then a ramp going up to white, with this yellow going from the center outwards. So you can probably make a texture as well. And you can just make a JPEG image and bring it into Blender. So let's do that. Let's go into shading first, and I'll just pop a new material on this. New material, and I'll grab that petal, and I'll call this material petal. And I'll connect my color here. And okay, it doesn't look very good at all because we haven't UV unwrapped it, right? It's just randomly put that petal in the wrong place. Okay, so let's go to our UV editing, and I'll just make sure we're looking at the lily petal here. Okay, there we go. Now let's go into edit mode. I can turn off my modifiers. They're not really necessary at the moment. I can go into edit mode, face select, and if I just press A, oh, I'm not seeing my selection here. Hold on. Just need to turn this on. Okay. And I press U for unwrap. We can just see which projection method works best. Let's try cube projection. That's fine. We've got two islands here. Maybe we just try, I don't know, let's see smart, if that works. Not so great. We can even try projecting from view. Project from view. Yeah, that looks pretty good. You know, we don't need anything too complicated because these petals are going to be quite small. Now, what I know is that that is actually this bit here, which is the front of our petal. So I'm just going to R180, rotate it. It's going to scale it up. And with my proportional editing here, I'm going to turn that on. I'm just going to get this sort of a bit closer to our petal. Something like, I don't know. So what I'm doing is I'm using scale and using my proportional editing as I need it. And I'm basically just putting all of my UVs inside this petal so that we get, actually I might turn that proportional editing off, I don't really need it. Okay, so if I turn that down, I'm just using G, S, and I want to get some of that green because that's kind of that cool bit that makes it look like there's a stem there. So I'm going to stretch this out. You know, it's very similar to how we did the book. We're just using this image to get some of the detail that'll make this flower look really cool. Okay, so there we go. And let's turn our modifiers back on. And now we have a pretty nice looking flower petal. If I go back into my shading, we could, play around a little bit more. We could maybe, I want to right click, I'm going to have it shade smooth. Maybe we'll make it a tiny bit shiny. That could be nice. Maybe I'll add a tiny bit of subsurface scattering, like 0.005. And, or actually maybe the petal shouldn't be shiny at all. Maybe it should be sort of smoother. That's something you can kind of play around with a little bit later. I might even turn that up. 0.01. Not even 0.1. Okay, that's too much. It's starting to look a bit weird. Let's go 0.05. Okay, we can come back to that, and once it's in the rest of your scene, you'll be able to see a lot better, what looks right. Okay, so let's go back to, I don't know, animation. That's a fine tab to use. So, all right. So now there's a few different ways that that we can distribute this petal. There's not that many of them, so I won't bother using the array modifier, which is what is used in the tutorial. I'm just going to duplicate it. But first of all, I'm going to do a nice little trick using the 3D cursor. So I'm just going to go into my flower, and I want to go to the edge of my flower, maybe vertex. I want to go right to the middle, and I'm going to press Shift S and put my cursor to selected. So now with my cursor there, I'm going to press Shift A and add a plain axis empty. And what I want to do is I want to parent my flower to this empty. So if I select the petal, Shift select the empty, and press Control P and set parent to object. And if you don't see it there, you can go object, parent, and object will do the same thing. Now, if I move the empty, it'll move anything parented to the empty. So that's one nice thing. But another nice trick that I really like is if we set our displacement here, instead of to local, to an object, and I select the empty, what's cool is if I move this flower, every time I move the petal, we're going to distort it a little bit differently. And what that means now is that every time we copy a new petal, it's going to be kind of unique, which I think is kind of cool. I'll check if it works as well here. Let's try that. Yeah. Okay. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to make the rest of the petals. So I'm going to take this petal. I'll look from the top, and I want to make, I think lilies have 5 petals, I think. Ooh. Probably should have checked that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I count 6. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so there's 6. So 2 sets of 3. So if we do 360 divided by 3, we get 120. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this one by pressing Shift D, left click, then I will rotate it, RZ120. That's not what I want. Okay, let me just do one more thing I forgot to do. I'm going to delete that one I duplicated. The other thing I want to do is I want to make object, I want its origin to be the 3D cursor. So now when I rotate it, it rotates around the 3D cursor, which is going to make it much easier for us to put that petal where we want it. So I'll go back to looking down the Z axis, and I'll go Shift D, left click, RZ120. I'll do another one, Shift D, left click, RZ120. Okay, and if we look at our empty now, we have 3 petals, and I should name them, shouldn't I? Before I go any further. Petal 2, petal 3. Okay, now if I just grab all of these, 1, 2, 3, Shift select, and I press Shift D, left click, and I rotate all of them, RZ120. Whoops, sorry, it shouldn't be 120. It should be, ooh, let me think about this. What's that going to be? 60? Oh, gosh, hold on, I didn't think about that. RZ60, yes, okay. And then I'm going to move these ones down a little bit so they're not overlapping. And okay, already that's a pretty nice looking flower. It looks a little bit, maybe a little bit dead. If you want to raise it up, because we've still got our modifiers, we can always just, grab these, turn our proportional editing on, and we can still kind of make the flower look a little bit more lively. Okay, because I probably made the petals just a little bit too flat. Okay, so that's something you can fix yourself. The final thing, I'm going to show you the technique to make the stem, and you can use this exact same technique to make the pistils and the stamens and the other parts of the flower that you'd see here. Okay, so making a stem, I'll use a slightly different technique. I'm going to Shift A, and this time I'm going to add a curve called a Bezier curve. And maybe you don't see anything, but if you look underneath, there should be this little curve that should have been added where your 3D cursor is. Now I'm just going to look down the y-axis and I'm going to rotate it R90, and I can grab it and just have it so we can see it. And then I'll just scale it up a little bit. Maybe something like that. Now if we look from perspective, we can see that this curve is curvy, it's got a bend on it. The bend at the moment is a little bit big, so I'll press tab here and we can just drag select these handles, and we can either rotate and it'll rotate the whole curve, which is kind of cool, or we can even scale these handles. And basically this is it's a curve which is different to a polygon. We might talk a little bit in class about the differences between vectors and bitmaps and curves and polygons in class. But essentially it's, instead of being composed of lots of little straight lines like a polygon line would be, a curve has edit handles like this, and at the moment it has no geometry. Excuse me, just a moment. Okay, so now I just want to give it some geometry so there's something to look at. So if I go into the curve little tab here and I scroll down to geometry, we can leave it as round, and let's just make the depth 0.01, and now you can see we've got this this stem, which is all right. Now I would probably also, I think I need to rotate this so it kind of looks like it's growing into the plant a little bit, so the stem actually looks like it could be for this flower. And I'd have to look online. It looks like the stem should probably be a bit thicker, so let's just make this 0.02, something like that's probably okay for now. And then also we can give it a material. So if we go into shading, now I might have to convert it to a polygon first. I'm not sure, just let me check. Oh no, that seems to work fine. So if I grab a green, obviously that's much too bright, so let's just desaturate that, bring it down. Maybe I make it a little darker. A photographic reference here can be useful, but also we can adjust this once we have the rest of our scene set up. And maybe I'll put a tiny bit of subsurface scattering on it. And look, that kind of looks okay. It's a little bit bluer than this yellow-green here, but it's getting close. The next thing I want to do is I also want that to be parented to this empty, because at the moment with the empty, if I click on that and grab it, I'll move the whole flower, but I won't move the stem. So I'm going to click on the stem. I'm going to call it stem, and then I'll shift click on the empty, Control P, object. So now if we move, let's call it flower 1. If we move flower 1, we move everything. So I said that making the stem can be the same technique to make the pistil and the stamens, and I'll just really quickly show you what I mean. If I Shift A and add a Bezier curve again, it's over there because I must have moved my 3D cursor. Oh, I moved my flower, sorry. And I just, put that pistil, I might just go into wireframe mode so I can see what I'm doing. I just want to put that in the middle of my flower and maybe straighten it up a little bit. Turn off my proportional editing would help. Something like that. And if I go back here, I could do the same thing, and I could give it a tiny bit, 0.001. Oh, that's much too thin. 0.005, something like that. Still too thin. Okay, let's go 0.01. And then I could, I don't know, I'd have to look at this a little more clearly. I'd have to make a few of them, so I could grab it, bend it a little bit, bend it, maybe make it a little bit taller, maybe, oh, here's a cool trick. If you want it twice as thick, you can either do your math or you can go ×2, and you can do little multiplications in all of these windows. It's a really handy trick, especially when you're dealing with numbers that are a bit more complicated than, than 1 and 2. But yeah, so you know, you could do this, and we could call this, I think it's a pistil of the flower. I'd also want to put that into our group here, so I would I'd click on the pistil, and I'd shift click on our empty again, Control P, parent it to the object, and now I might, you know, duplicate it, rotate it around the Z-axis, and yeah, then you just have to make a little blob to put on the top. But you can see that that's already looking pretty good. And now the handy thing, that now this whole thing is parented, is we can just scale it down to match the rest of our scene. So I don't, where's our original flowers gone? So if I go to my flower here and have a look, okay, it's very tiny, there it is. Okay, so I'll just click on this, and if I press scale now, because it's all parented, it scales it all evenly. So that's super handy. So I can just G for grab, scale it down, something like this, and there we go. Okay, so now that we have all of our components grouped in our new flower 1 group, and we can sort of move it around, what we can also do is we can duplicate it. But when we duplicate it, we actually want to grab everything in the group. If we just duplicate this empty, we're actually just going to get another empty without all the stuff in it. So if I delete that and I just grab everything here and I duplicate, I'll get another empty. I'll get the whole set basically, and that's kind of what we want. And same thing goes when we want to sort of pop all of this in our flower group. We'd want to move all of these together into our flower collection. So I just press M and go into my little folder hierarchy and pop all of these in flower. So if I go down here, now we've got new flower 1 and new flower 2 with all of our flowery objects there. And that means now that we can sort of turn everything back on, turn all of our objects back on, our environment box and our table. And of course I've got these 2 new flowers sitting there kind of being annoying, sort of sitting there in the wrong place. But you know, that's what we made. And yeah, so I hope you know, you might like to make your flowers like this, or make them another way. And I very much encourage you to have a look around and, you know, find interesting ways to make these flowers. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.